So today, that's what we'll start with, mostly with the North Korea stuff, because that's what's in the news. I've been doing a fair amount of media. Most of my friends in this field have been doing media now for several weeks. Is there going to be a war, and Donald Trump, and THAAD, and airstrikes, and all this sorts of stuff. So we'll sort of start with that, and then I'd like to discuss South Korea in the second portion of my discussion here, and that will be like what actually happened with Park Ateneo. The details of it are actually really, really tangled, so I'll just give sort of like a brief version, and then I'll actually talk about what I think it means. The actual details of who gave money to whom is is still not really entirely clear, I think, to a lot of people, so please don't push me in that too much. And then we'll talk about the current South Korean election. Because President Park was removed, the South Korean Constitution requires a special election within 60 days. That election will happen on Tuesday, and it looks like a liberal candidate is going to win. The polling strongly suggests that at this point, so we can discuss that as well. And a lot of the confusion in this war scare is coming from the behavior of the American administration. We can talk about this maybe during the Q&A, but normally when these sorts of things happen, the Americans are sort of a pillar of predictability and stability. In the last 5 or 6 years, 8 years, maybe there have been 2 other war scares, one in 2010 and one in 2013. And once you start really bombing North Korea, I mean, you're bombing one of the most dangerous countries in the world, right? You're bombing a country with an army that's 1.5 million people, that's been training for this event for decades. North Korea also has an alliance with China. Once the American bombs start falling, the North Koreans will almost certainly call up the Chinese and say, help. Right? I have been arguing this for years. South Korea is very poorly configured for a sort of tit-for-tat escalation with the North. Seoul and its surrounding province called Gyeonggi contain 50% of South Korea's entire national population. That is 25 million people, 26 million people, right? In a space the size of the American state of Connecticut, right? It is extremely dense. Worse, it adjoins the demilitarized zone. This large urban agglomeration of people, 20 million plus, begins just 30 miles from North Korea. These people are hugely vulnerable, right? And it gets worse. Seoul and its surrounding satellite cities are getting larger, not smaller, and the South Korean capital infrastructure and the center of the economy is all located in Seoul also. So basically, the heart of Korea is 30 miles away from one of the world's most fearsome militaries equipped with nuclear weapons now. This means that South Korea is extremely vulnerable to sustained enemy retaliation. If the North Koreans were to actually drop a nuclear weapon in Seoul, it would kill 500,000 people. And so because of this, we've never actually struck. Therefore, my prediction is no. Donald Trump will actually not strike North Korea. He can talk that way, but the constraints are just too severe. So what do we do? Let me make a couple suggestions. And to simply flood North Korea with as much information as we can, because the more North Koreans learn about what the rest of the world is like, the more North Koreans learn that their own government is very corrupt, that the Kim family are not sort of the North Korean elite at the very top is a monarchy. Last name being Kim, so we call them the Kim family. We're now on the third Kim. Okay, what else? China. North Korea is not North Korea is not independent. North Korea has a lot of trouble standing on its own. For most of North Korea's history, it had a patron, that was the USSR. When the USSR collapsed in the early 1990s, China, which is now North Korea's patron, did not really start supporting North Korea until around 2000 or so. So for a brief period between Soviet support and Chinese support, North Korea stood on its own and it experienced a major regime crisis, the famine. So one other argument out there is that if we can cut off North Korea's patronage relationship with China, which means specifically, can we get China to enforce the sanctions regime, which they do not, then you have no more Chinese resources flowing into North Korea, and then you should have a contraction of available resources in North Korea, and North Korean elites start to fight over what's left. We get to this point. If the North Koreans actually have a proven functional nuclear weapon, right, ICBM that can fly all the way across and strike CONUS, Las Vegas or St. Louis or something like that. If they prove they can do that, in my opinion, the Americans will strike, regardless of what the South Koreans and the Japanese think. This would be disastrous. So to my mind, we're now on something of a clock. We're now on something of a clock. We're now on sort of a countdown, right? The next 5 to 10 years, right? Will the North Koreans actually get this? When we get to that point, will the Americans strike? Let me shift to South Korea, and I'll talk briefly about the impeachment scandal, and then we'll talk about the election. They're kind of tied together. Here's the basics, though. The president was removed primarily for 2 big reasons. One, the Constitutional Court, the High Court of Korea, agreed that President Park had known about Che's efforts to basically extract bribes, graft from some of Korea's largest corporations. And then also, the Constitutional Court also accepted that Che had played an improper role in state affairs. It's more complicated than that. I would encourage you to read about it if you are interested. But this is important. This is important because it then actually led to a full and completed impeachment of a presidential executive. South Koreans just showed us how to forcefully remove a corrupt president without violence, without terrorism, without the military on the streets, without a coup d'etat, right? For 3 months, there were demonstrations on the streets of Korea's cities that at one point were so large they represented 4% of the entire national population. Try to imagine that. 4% of the entire country marching in the streets. Nobody got arrested. Well, yeah, some people got arrested, pardon me, but nobody got beaten up, nobody's car got set on fire, nobody got murdered, nobody got knifed, none of that, right? The protesters even picked up their trash when they were finished. Can you imagine, I'm an American, can you imagine the Americans doing that? Man, no way. We'd be like burning cars and throwing chairs through the window of Starbucks and everything. Oh my God. Can you imagine what the Americans would do? Okay, so let's then switch to the election. So, on the left, there is a small far-left party in Korea. There is a larger center-left party in Korea. There is a centrist party in Korea. And then there are 2 center-right parties. So basically what you have is sort of far-left, left, center, right, and then there's no far-right party in Korea. There's no like fascist or sort of anti-immigrant party in Korea. The far-left party will probably get around 8 to 10%. It's okay, I guess, but whatever. The centrist party, which is called the People's Party, and their candidate is a guy named Ahn Cheol-soo. Ahn Cheol-soo was actually doing pretty well, and his numbers have recently collapsed. We can talk about that. On the right, the old party that supported Park Geun-hye, as you might imagine, has been very badly tarred, very badly stained by the scandal. In order to sort of get themselves away from this, they renamed themselves in an effort to sort of say they weren't actually the Park Party, they were. And they also had a factional split. So we actually now have the main right-wing party, which is known as the Liberty Korea Party, and a small factional party of anti-Park MPs, right? And so they're each actually running their own presidential candidate. What this means is that the vote on the South Korean right is split of that. In my opinion, this is the biggest story of the South Korean election, is the implosion of the South Korean right. South Korea has traditionally actually elected conservative presidents. Since democratization, 1987, Korea has only had 2 liberal presidents. In part, I think this is because of North Korea. I think North Korea often menaces South Korea, and that drives South Korean voters to the right. Now, the right is kind of imploding. In fact, so desperate is the South Korean right to escape Park Geun-hye's shadow that the South Korean conservative candidate Hong is calling himself the Donald Trump of Korea. Sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger strategy. However, he has not managed to nail down those loose conservative voters, right? And we can talk about why, but the centrist candidate has just not picked up traction. What this means then, and what we'll sort of finish with, is that a liberal, the left-wing candidate, will probably win. His name is Moon Jae-in. His party is the Democratic Party, or the Democratic Party of Korea. But yes, so this will be a big transition. We'll now have a left-wing president in Korea. There is a fair amount of anxiety among sort of the Western analyst community about what this might mean. We can talk about this too. Traditionally, the South Korean left has been sort of softer on North Korea and has been tougher on the United States and Japan. We can discuss this as well. I guess we're just sort of out of time, but that is my prediction. I don't think it's particularly dramatic at this point to say that that Moon will win. So I will stop there. Okay, thank you very much. 감사합니다.